morning, everybody, and welcome to the first policy session of the day, Less is More, an overview of sufficiency policies to reduce emissions and increase quality of life. My name is Fiona Breuker. I'm a research fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and I will guide you through today's session. We will start with today's, okay, that's the clicker working for me. We will start with 4 presentations of results of the Fulfill project, and we'll then have a first round of active participation on your part with a first Slido session. We will then take sufficiency to the European level and have a presentation on the Sufficiency Manifesto and the EU's climate plans, before we will hear some political commentary from our newly elected member of European Parliament, part of Place Publique and the S&D group, Thomas Pellara-Carlin. And Dr. Frank Siebern-Thomas, head of the Fair Green and Digital Transitions Unit at the Commission's DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. At last, we will conclude with a final round of questions for you on Slido and some time for discussion with the speakers. Fulfill is an EU-funded research project on sufficiency that started in September 2021 and will run until this September. So we're almost done and ready to present some of the exciting results to you. The research was conducted in Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Latvia, and India. And today you will hear some of the results of around 10,000 citizen surveys, the analysis of sufficiency policies, and input-output models quantifying sufficiency measures. So why did we set out to study sufficiency? Most of you probably know the concept of planetary boundaries, which defines 9 limits of Earth's stability and resilience that should not be crossed to prevent severe and irreversible environmental changes. The bad news is, as most of you also probably know, we've already crossed 6, leading to more frequent floods, droughts, heat waves, and significant health and economic risks. And it's not just that we are dangerously damaging the planet, which would be bad enough in itself, but we are also over-consuming of resources in a highly unequal way. That means that income and carbon emissions are highly correlated. So the richest countries, but also the richest individuals within countries, are responsible for most of the carbon emissions, while at the same time, there are still many people struggling to satisfy their basic energy needs. In Europe, to give an example, approximately 42 million people were unable to keep their homes adequately warm in winter in 2022. So the potential of sufficiency is to tackle these 2 issues at the same time. It tries to find the sweet spot in the donut, forgive me for the pun, as it is depicted here, that is well-being for all without overshooting planetary boundaries. Compared to other sustainability strategies, sufficiency is about avoiding resource consumption. So, for example, I'm gonna walk you through this with the example of the car. So sufficiency would be avoiding using a car by cycling, using public transport, car sharing, walking, doing home office. In contrast, both efficiency and consistency are trying to change the impact of what we're doing, but without really changing what we're doing. So efficiency, as most of you probably know, is about producing the same or more with less energy. So to stick with our example, it would be changing to an electric car. And consistency is emphasizing using less harmful resources. So it would be, in the car example, using renewable electricity for the electric car. So far, unfortunately, sufficiency has received less attention than efficiency and renewables, but we need sufficiency, as has also been emphasized by the recent IPCC report, to reach our climate goals, because efficiency and renewables will not be enough in itself to reach them quickly enough. This can nicely be illustrated through the example of SUVs, where you can see the rebound effect happening. Basically, there have been major technical advancements in fuel efficiency and car emissions, for example, through electric cars, yet these gains are largely cancelled out by the trend towards heavier and bigger cars. So this is happening to a point that SUVs were responsible for over 20% of the growth in global energy-related CO2 emissions in 2023. So if SUVs were a country, they would be the world's 5th largest emitter of CO2. So that shows you nicely that even though efficiency and renewables are important, they are not enough. We also need sufficiency to promote smaller cars or even better other forms of transport that are less polluting. Fulfill's definition of sufficiency is very close to that of the IPCC report, which defines sufficiency policies as a set of measures and daily practices that avoid demand for energy, materials, land, and water, while delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. This definition emphasizes that individual behavior is shaped by policies and infrastructures. Individuals do not behave in a vacuum. They are influenced by everything that's around them. Today, unfortunately, often unsustainable consumption patterns are favored by the system. So, as many of you have probably been annoyed about in the past, train tickets are often more expensive than flying. Vegetarian meals are often harder to get than meat-based food, and city infrastructure is shaped for cars. So the go-to option is often the less sustainable option. And that is the case despite the fact that not all changes are slow or expensive to implement. A nice example here is the speed limit that can save a lot of emissions and increase road safety and is kind of relatively cheap to implement and quick. A great example of how sufficiency infrastructures can change behavior comes from Paris, where you can see roads that were once open to cars now fully taken over by pedestrians and cars. And I can say from personal experience, it's really fun to ride on these highways for bikes in Paris today. As part of the Fulfill project, we also produced a short video that my colleague Alicia lent her voice to kindly, and we were gonna have a look at it together now.
Welcome to a world where we put sufficiency first. A place all about creating social, infrastructural, and regulatory conditions that allow us to change the amount of energy we consume through individual and collective lifestyle changes. Sufficiency has dual benefits: reduce energy use to stay within planetary boundaries, while improving our overall well-being and fulfilling everyone's basic energy needs. But what does sufficiency actually look like? Consider transportation, a pivotal element in our sufficient world. Embracing bicycles for public transit not only reduces air pollution, but also promotes more active lifestyles. But to achieve it, we need essential infrastructures, supportive policies, and societal norms. By creating bike lanes and offering bike rental options, we make cycling accessible to everyone. Think about diet. In our sufficient world, plant-based options are more readily available at cafeterias and other public food places. Consuming more local and in-season products, along with reducing excess meat consumption, helps us move toward healthier diets in our everyday lives. Imagine a world with fewer advertisements tempting us to indulge in excessive consumption. This can reduce overall energy consumption, while also allowing us to spend less money and use the items we already have. Sufficiency is about finding the sweet spot between staying within planetary boundaries and creating a just society where everyone can thrive. By reducing excess and luxury consumption, we can distribute Earth's limited resources more fairly and decrease carbon inequalities around the world. The world of sufficiency can be our world. We can all have a say in the policies that shape our lifestyles, and not only safeguard our planet's future, but also enhance our lives today.
We will now start the first round of presentations by our speakers with the project coordinator of Fulfill, Dr. Elisabeth Dütschke, head of Actors and Social Acceptance in the Transformation of the Energy System at Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research. The floor is yours, Elisabeth, and I hand you the clicker.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the mic's working, is that correct? No? Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy now to, after Fiona created this wonderful vision or picture of sufficiency, now move on to starting on presenting our findings, where we try to really dig deeper. So what's behind, what does it mean, what's the reality, kind of today, and what are the barriers, and what are also what my colleagues will present the possible impacts and maybe also drawbacks that could be connected to sufficiency. So first of all, there has been an exciting study, unfortunately not by us, nevertheless we'd love to share it, who looked into how far societies and citizens embrace or resist to sufficiency. And a very clear finding they had is when they compared what policymakers suggest to mitigate climate change in the NECPs, and comparing this to what citizens recommend in case they engage on sufficiency, on climate change, efficiency, consistency measures, that we find that they come to that we see a large difference where citizens, societies really suggest sufficiency policies, while policymakers are more reluctant to do so. So we wanted to know more about this difference, and maybe also what leads citizens, or under which conditions citizens really come to these conclusions. So we are building on a large body of data. Fiona already introduced you to some of this. So there were like 2 rounds of surveys, both including around 10,000 or nearly 10,000 citizens in Europe, and on top of that also 1,000 citizens from India. But surveys are just kind of give you a glimpse, because you ask the questions and people introduce predefined answers. So we also had interviews and citizen workshops, which allow more for being into direct interaction, and also kind of as a connecting element, we studied 45 initiatives who are engaged on sufficiency, covering a wide variety of activities, from the repair cafe that's pictured here, but also on food initiatives, on people living in tiny houses in special settlements, etc., etc. And what we like to look into is now these dynamics of people kind of saying stuck in everyday life, being representative samples on the one hand, and then on the other hand, what happens if you engage citizens. From the survey, so the unprepared publics, what do we find? So in the first step, we looked into how do they live today, and how far do sufficiency lifestyles exist, and given our emphasis on well-being, does meaning being low on environmental impact. And what we looked into is mainly climate impact, so it's the carbon footprint, individual level carbon footprint of people. Is it still possible to have high well-being and a low carbon footprint? And what we find in our European samples is that yes, it is, but only to few. So we find small shares of people, 3 to 4% per country studied, that live very sufficiently, and another 8 to 9% somewhat sufficient, in this case meaning not across all life domains and sectors, but overall a low carbon footprint. But this is kind of mirrored with a share of 12 to 14% of people who have a very low footprint, but experience deprivation in their everyday life. So hinting back to what Fiona just said, people having problems, for example, to pay for heating. And what connects now, or what's different between those two, is that these sufficient people are very good on, they have more resources available. It's also more women in these shares, which kind of also points to important questions about gendered lifestyles. But mirrored also from the interviews is that we see that people who are living more sufficiently, usually they have time to invest, they have resources in the background, financial resources, education, etc. And that the well-being is at the same time outcome and motivated to them. And this is also what brings people to join these initiatives. Now, assuming and seeing the ambitious climate goals ahead, we could make now the call for very quickly implementing strong policies to realize sufficiency in Europe. But what we see is if we get with these very strong policies to an unprepared public, they're a bit reluctant. So we find definitely more people being opposed to this and only few spontaneous supporters. However, when we look into kind of what makes the difference again between those opposing and supporting, we see that there are many pathways to change the discussion. So of course people prefer lighter measures in the beginning, but they also I see quite a difference if you change the communication. For example, we did one experiment in this survey where we changed one word from punishing to overcome as the aim of a policy measure, and immediately we see an increase. And then also people who know more, who are more familiar with the concepts, are also more supporting, but familiarity is low. And at the same time, if people learn that it's effective and that others support it, again, they also are more positive. And what they want is to have a say, so like in the citizen conferences, be engaged in these changes and having the chance to prepare them together with the policy message. So we see a way forward to support sufficiency. However, we need the right ecosystem, societal context. And here I move on to Sergio Oliveira.
Thanks a lot, Elisabeth. We will now hear about a concrete sufficiency example on the ground from Sergio Oliveira, Head of Business and Finance Innovation at Politecnico di Torino. Sergio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I will present the Concerti project. I would like to stress that sufficiency is a question of change of behavior. In Italy today, the change of behavior are the renewable energy communities, or REC, and the real catalyst of the change are the money that is related to the implementation of the renewable energy communities. Practically speaking, a renewable energy community is made by a group of users and producers. Practically speaking, some producers put energy into the grid, others use the energy, and the sharing is awarded by money by the government. Practically speaking, this is the result of a process of transposition of the EU RED II directive that has been recently changed and moved to RED III directive. But it is very important to know that what's happening in Italy today is the result of the transposition of the RED II directive that, practically speaking, create RECs that are the engine of change. They are legal entities that are entitled to do things and to spend money. The first renewable energy community of Italy was established in the city of Magliano Alpi in northern Italy in 2020. The Concerti renewable energy community was born on April the 9th this year. You can see on the logo the entire northern Italy. This is because the territory of competence is extended to the whole northern Italy. So what's happening in Concerti is a national-wide scope. Practically, we are saving water because there's a change in the irrigation system thanks to specific funding by the government. Then that is use less water and thus cutting by 50% the water used. But this water is used to generate hydropower, and this lead to renewable energy put into the grid. But it is important to say two things. First, renewable energy community, as I said, is a legal entity. And second point, the REC is forcing a circularity between production and use of energy. What's happening is that in a renewable energy community, if you use energy when it is available, you get incentives. Please note that the energy is produced by other members of the community at local level. That is, if you use energy while the energy is produced locally, you are paid, you get incentives. So you are, how can I say, forced to change your behavior. And using energy when it is available by local producers means that you do not use the energy from the grid. To give you some figures, for each megawatt of installed power, well, 1 megawatt is worth roughly 800,000 euro of investment. Well, you get, in REC, you get up to 100,000 euro per year per megawatt for 20 years, if clearly you are able to use energy when it is available. The government also said that in cities with less than 5,000 inhabitants, 2.2 billion euros are available for installations in REC. Some other figures, if you are a citizen, you spend, let's say, 1,000 euro for a 10,000 euros for to install a renewable energy system, you get 40% non-refundable fund. That is, you spend 6,000 instead of 10,000. Then, over the 6,000, you get 50% tax deduction. That is, you pay 3,000 instead of 10,000. That is 70% less. This is possible if the energy community works. That is, you are strongly encouraged to change your behavior because you get the money if you use the energy when it is produced by the Commission. There's also another noble byproduct of this process, that is all incentives, that is roughly 1,000 euro per year per megawatt. Well, the incentives that are more than 50% must be used for social initiatives. In the case of Concerti project, where we aim at 50 megawatts installed, that is 1.5 million euros per year for 20 years for social purposes. And much of this money will be used to fight energy poverty and also for raising awareness campaign. The message is that in Italy today, thanks to the transposition of European directives, real engine of behavioral change are renewable energy communities. And at the beginning of July, a delegation from South Korea will come to Mariano Alpi to see how the European directives are implemented at local level. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sergio. Yeah, we can have a round of applause. Okay, thanks for presenting this concrete sufficiency example on the ground. And we will now move to our online speaker, Yves Marignac, energy expert and spokesperson at EUSEW2024, who will talk about sufficiency policies and is joining us today from the ECEE summer study on energy efficiency. But despite the name, I hear that sufficiency has made it into the agenda quite some times, which I think is good news for sufficiency. So Yves, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well, and I'm very pleased to talk to you, although I'm very frustrated not to be with you. But that's for good reasons, because we are pushing also sufficiency in the ECEE, and I'll be presenting some of the results that I will just talk about now in a few days at this conference. So this is about policies on sufficiency, and I'll draw some comments from some of the work we did in Fulfill. But I want to start by emphasizing that we can identify different sufficiency levels, and we can relate policies and measures to those levels and design them. The first thing is that we need, when we speak about sufficiency, to distinguish between what we would call, in our terms, servicial, dimensional, and organizational sufficiency, which calls for changes in uses, but also changes in the size and design of our equipment, buildings, and changes in the way we organize to share or use them. And you can see on this slide that this could have some different application in all of the sectors, from reducing heating temperatures or flying less to circular economy, modal shift for transports, sharing products, and so on. The good news is that we can identify policies in all the sets of policies, from information and sensibilization to regulation, infrastructures, going through taxes and so on. And the important thing to keep in mind is that if we want to go for sufficiency, we really need to address three levels: not only the habits, the change in consumer patterns, but also the infrastructures that allow those changes, and the societal framework, the norms, the values that drive such changes. Next slide. This is about some of the specific work we did in the Fulfill project. We worked on some specific sufficiency assumptions, and you will have some results in the following presentation to discuss possible changes and dynamics, thinking of the societal changes through categories and long-term targets. And we addressed a series of 7 assumptions that you can see here, from sharing space in housing, sharing products, reducing the size of cars, shift to biking, flying less, and change in diets. Next slide. I will then focus on only one of those examples, which is car sizing, just to explain the kind of work we did and how we could implement this for other sufficiency-related levels. So this is about car sizing, and you can see on the top that you need for in policy framing to target different audiences or different players, like the car industry, the manufacturers, of course, the households, I mean, everyday users of cars, but also the users of car fleets that have a big importance to drive the market. And on the bottom, you can see what we identified as enablers for change, barriers to change, and mixed factors. You can see, for instance, in the enablers, the fact that there's a growing social awareness, of course, a concern for the use of material resources. The growing urban spatial planning constraints are also a possible driver. And as well, the need to transform funding schemes, especially when you change the size and kind of cars you are using. On the size of barriers, there's world trade rules, the business models of the manufacturers, a lack of awareness, and some social norms like the image of freedom with big cars, or some masculinity norms that are also at play. You can actually identify policies that could relate to action on these enablers and barriers in all the fields, as I said, like going to the market with shared targets for some smaller vehicles with labels regarding the life cycle CO2 content of the vehicles, for instance, going for some fiscal incentives, support to new manufacturing, to new business models, like building smaller cars, going for some progressive tariffs related to the size of cars, whether it's for motorways or for parking tolls and so on. And of course, some information to raise the awareness and build new narratives. Next slide. What we did, and I'm not going to get into the details of this, of course, is that we actually looked at these enablers, these barriers, and the mixed factors like security, which could come from an individual perspective, be a driver to have bigger cars, but from a collective one, be a drivers to have smaller ones. And we look at the policies and how different policies that exist could address these enablers and barriers and mixed factors. And you can see on that table that actually we have a set of policies that really could cover all the factors and use all the potential to overcome barriers and build on enablers. Next slide is about the same analysis, but thinking of targets and thinking of depth of impact and timeline. And again, I'm not going into details, but what it shows globally is that we have, through that set of policies, ways to target the different players that need to change, and also ways to target different timelines, have a short-term impact, and also work on a more structural basis to get to long-term impacts. Next, and I think last slide, is just to say that we are not starting from scratch. We really have a whole set of identified sufficiency policies that exist to target all sectors, players, and users. And I just want to refer here to 2 important things. The first one is the energy sufficiency policy database that is collecting sufficiency-related policies and measures, and there are more than 30 300, sorry, in that database. And the second one is the sufficiency manifesto, which I will talk again later, which is just a call for putting sufficiency at the core of EU agenda, and also promotes or recommends a set of policies covering all sector and cross-sectoral ones as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Yves. And we will conclude the first round of presentations with Matteo Giacomoprina, Senior Researcher at EURAC, who will present results from an input-output model quantifying sufficiency measures.
Hello to everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation and the introduction. So, title of my presentation is What Can Sufficiency Contribute? So the results of input-output model. So we have seen from the previous presentation that some data have been collected for different sufficiency measures, and we will see how putting this data into a global model, input-output model, we will see which kind of impacts we have for these sufficiency measures. So impacts on greenhouse gas emissions, on macroeconomic indicators, energy use, and so on. So this is exactly, so looking at our methodology, so we, let's say from other previous activities of fulfilled projects, we have collected this data in these 6 sufficiency measures that we have seen, so diets, sharing spaces in housing, moderate car sizing, sharing products, focusing on washing machines, biking and flying less. And these data have been collected for 5 countries in detail. And we have collected this data, we have evaluated the reference scenario, so looking at historical trends and then applying clustering analysis to extend the data that we had for 5 countries to all European countries. And so we get the data for each EU27 country regarding the historical trends for these measures, the future trends, and through the clustering analysis, so we extended the data for all countries. So we applied the Mario model, which is an input-output macroeconomic model, to understand the impacts of these measures in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of economic indicators, and so on. And now we look at the results, so this chart shows the greenhouse gas emissions for the reference scenario and for the reference scenario implementing each of these sufficiency measures, so that we can see in a relative way what is the impact of each sufficiency measure. So, and we see that that the measures regarding diets and flying less are have the highest potential reduction of greenhouse gas emission compared to the reference scenario, but that also other sufficiency measures have a potential impact, although a more limited one. If we look at the data in cumulative ways, so we look at the data and so the abatement of greenhouse gas emissions by the different sectors that we are considering in our model, so we can see that from now to 2050 we can abate 2 gigaton of CO2 equivalent emissions that can be saved thanks to these measures, and 90% of these is due to the sufficiency measure, diets changing, and flying less. And from this chart we can also see that the main sectors to be affected are the agricultural, manufacturing, and transport sectors. then we wanted to be sure about the results that we got. So we wanted to somehow validate our procedure, our modeling approach. And so we compared the results that we got to another project, which is called Climate 2050 Pathways Explorer. And we made the comparison on diets and flying less, that are the two measures that have the highest impact. And yeah, so from this chart, we can see that our results are more in line with their most extreme scenario, so the ambition level 4. But at least we can see from this comparison that we have, let's say, results that are in line with results developed in another project. So to conclude, in this phase of the project, we have received the data from the different sufficiency measures that we have seen in the previous presentation. We have identified the historical trends and future trends for this data. We have clustered the data in order to extend the data to all European countries. We have applied an input-output economic model, and we found that from now to 2050 it's possible to abate 2 gigaton of CO2 equivalent emissions, and that diets and flying less are the two sufficiency measures with the highest impact that mostly affect the agricultural, manufacturing, and transport sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matteo. We will now move to the first round of Slido questions for you. I invite all of you to connect, to join on slido.com with the event code #EUSEW2024. I will give you a moment to do that. And then we will let you estimate some of the findings from the Fulfill survey that Elisabeth presented some of the results of, so in the first presentation. And the first question to all of you is, how many people indicate that they have too much space in their place of living? So how many people think they could maybe move to a place with less space? We have between 11 and 18, or between 3 and 10%. Yeah. Back and forth, back and forth. Okay. 50-50. Should we stop there? All right. Great. I think we're about 50-50, 51-49. Let's stop there. So the majority of people was right. It is between 11% and 18% of people. I will show you some of the results of the survey. I'm not sure if I can jump there now. Don't think I can. Ah, yes, great. Oh, don't look. Okay, there you go. That was the second question. How did you feel about the size of your home in 2021? And here you have some more of the results from the survey. You see that as you rightly guessed, the majority of you, between 11%, which was in France, and 18%, which was in Denmark, report having too much space, as opposed to 19%, also in France, and 30%, also in Denmark, report having too little space. All right, we're moving on to the next question, which is, how many Europeans in our survey cycle every day? Is it between 5% in Italy and 24% in Denmark? Or is it between 4% in France and 24% in Denmark? Wait, I got lost there. Yeah, between 5 and 40, or between 4 and 24. Okay, I think there is a bigger majority here. For the huge gap between Italy and Denmark. Okay, I think we can leave it there. It doesn't seem to change much anymore. I hate to break it to you, but this time you were not right. It is between 4% in France and 24% in Denmark. And I will show you some more of the results. Yes, going back. Yes. That you can see on the screen now. And according to our survey, Danish people, which is maybe not surprising, seem to cycle most often, which might be partly due to their great cycling infrastructure. If some of you have been to Copenhagen ever, you've seen the famous huge cycle infrastructure. And French seem to cycle the least. Which maybe can change now that Paris is such a bike city. If you're interested to learn more about the survey results, I invite you to visit our project website, which we will share with you later, to have a look at the survey results. We have many of these very interesting graphs and findings of what EU citizens do in terms of sufficiency. Excuse me, we will now move again to Yves, and he will tell us about the Sufficiency Manifesto.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier. It's a Sufficiency Manifesto that was developed well along the last 6 months, let's say, and was published in March of this year, and was initiated by a group of well, think tanks and NGOs and players or academics also active in Brussels. And that is now signed by almost 100 organizations in Europe or different countries. And this Sufficiency Manifesto is really to call for a growing awareness of the role of sufficiency and building a sufficiency coalition in Europe. So that is the, I mean, we thought it was really time to put this on the table, considering the crisis and all the concerns. Next slide. And the manifesto is mostly divided in 3 parts. The first one is, I mean, actually emphasizing why managing demand through sufficiency policies is really needed now. We have seen a series of crises, unfortunately, COVID-19, the Ukrainian crisis, growing geopolitical tension and economic pressure, and we are facing a challenge to maintain stability in this evolving era of polycrisis. I mean, we started working on those issues with climate as the main topic on the agenda, but now we are facing also questions about security of supply, strategic autonomy, and the need to reindustrialize, while ecological concerns, of course, have been growing, and the climate urgency is obviously still there even further. So we think that putting sufficiency at the heart of European policies is a path to resilient global leadership, and we stick mostly in that Sufficiency Manifesto to the definition from IPCC, which is close to the one we've been using in Fulfill, that is about reducing demand for energy, materials, land and water, while delivering human well-being, so decent living conditions for all within planetary boundaries. Next slide is about the getting deeper into the real reasons to make sufficiency a priority for the EU. And when you actually look at it, sufficiency means a more resilient Europe. Reducing demand and using resources more wisely domestically is reducing the pressure from critical imports and vulnerability to shortages. It means less cost and therefore more competitiveness. It reduces the need of investments to reindustrialize and transform our economy to meet ecological to face ecological pressure. It is a way, of course, to facilitate achievement of our climate and energy targets, and a lot of scenarios show that. And it brings a better quality of life for all. I mean, it's very important to emphasize the common benefits in terms of health, in terms of urban environment, and many other issues of sufficiency policies, and also, of course, the link to social justice through redistributive patterns that it can bring. And altogether, sufficiency, therefore, means a more sustainable Europe. And we think that sufficiency is really the common denominator in the response to all aspects of the crisis, and should therefore be the common factor to all political agendas. I mean, whatever the policymakers are concerned with, there is part of the response that comes through sufficiency. Next slide. As I already mentioned, the third part of the Sufficiency Manifesto is about some concrete recommendations to put sufficiency at the heart of the EU strategic agenda. We think that sufficiency can really promote well-being and improve security and resilience across all energy, material, and resource-intensive sectors. And sorry, the manifesto sets a series of recommendations for transport mobility, better, investments in collective transport or cycling infrastructures, policies on the size of vehicles, reducing unnecessary air traffic, recommendations on energy buildings and special planning, like optimizing the use of existing buildings and spaces, like going for a net zero artificialization target, and better use of the existing appliances and so on, and progressive tariffs. Some recommendations for the materials, products, and foods that target obsolescence, the need for a circular economy, reducing food waste, for instance, and of course, some more cross-sectoral recommendations regarding information, regarding public campaigns, better taxation practice, and also funding schemes to support local citizen-driven bottom-up sufficiency projects, as the Fulfill project especially showed that this is one of the way forward to carry on with better understanding and supporting of sufficiency by policymakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves, for the second intervention. We will now move on to Gunnar Olsen from Inforce Europe, who will talk about sufficiency in the EU's climate plans.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me from here. Yes, I'm from the International Network for Sustainable Energy, which is a network of non-governmental organizations, and we've been working on this issue for more than 10 years together with other civil society organizations. We're very happy that it's possible to work further on it with this project here. And we hope that it can be the starting point of actually including sufficiency in both national and EU politics. So we have had a number of roles in the project. One of them has been analyzing some of the European climate plans and seeing how much sufficiency they already have in it. Part of our work in the network is we are following EU policies, and this is a bit part of that. You probably know that the climate plans are up for revision. There's going to be the national determined contribution, that it's called, for the Paris Agreement, with the EU is developing one, which is for 2035, with update also for the 2030, is to be submitted now around the end of 2024. And to do that, the EU has devised this plan of making 27 national energy and climate plans. Each country is doing its own plan, and then all these NECPs, that they are called, add up to the EU NDC. And we have then analyzed 4 of these NECPs for Denmark, France, Germany, and Italy, which was part of our project. We looked at buildings, mobility, products, and diets. And what we found was that if you look at different types of sufficiency, we have reducing of size and activity level, which was not very much embraced in these NECPs. There was taxes, which of course is a measure to make people consume less. but there was not much direct measures except support of work from home from Germany and Italy. When it comes to replace more consuming with less consuming resources, there was actually a number of them. They didn't cover everything, but there was like improved public transport and biking in all countries. In some countries, in France, there was banned short-haul flights, which for some reason was not in NECP, but it's still there. Saving energy, more vegetables in some countries, and repairs and recycling is also part of that. And then there was the organizational and sharing, which was also not very much taken up. There was vehicle sharing and renting in Germany and Italy. Then for each country, we compared our proposals, which I now have summarized here for, I'm just giving 2 examples because we have we have made it for each sector, for each country, but that would be too much to present here. So just look at the one, which was what they do for buildings in Germany. There's nothing about reducing size and activity, while there's a number of things, the policies that could actually be done, as Eve explained a minute ago, but here are some examples of promoting sharing of dwelling and assist moving to smaller dwellings, and also promote tiny houses, which many people are actually expressing that they would like to live in smaller houses, but they are not available. So it's just allowing that could also be at least one step forward. Replace with less resource-intensive use. We have energy advice services and dynamic electricity tariffs to move electricity use in time. Maybe not as strong as it was the example from Italy, but it's still there. But there's a number of other things could be done, including, for instance, progressive tariffs for energy, where you pay less for the first kilowatt hour and more for the last kilowatt hour, incentivizing to use less. If you look at another sector, we're speaking about mobility. Again, there's not much for reduced size and activity. They claim in the NECP that the German internet strategy to get everybody with good internet is improving work from home, which of course is part of it, but just one step. And there's a number of other things you can do or countries can do. For instance, support move closer to work in a number of ways, from planning to intensifying this moving along with the workplaces, and urban planning to reduce travel needs is another important one. When it comes to replace with less resource-intensive use, countries are actually proposing a lot of things in transport to intensify rail use, and also some to infrastructure. And in Germany, they even have depreciation of cargo bikes. The company want to do that. But there's still a number of more things that countries can do. And the same goes with the organizational about sharing, carpooling, bicycle and car sharing. Then we looked a little bit at the EU NDC, which of course is an overall picture which is summarizing all the other ones, so you couldn't, not so much EU can do as a country on sufficiency, but we found, for instance, while there is already a target for reduction of greenhouse gases from EU budget fund, they could include sufficiency guidelines requirements also in the EU funded. And for the carbon prices with ETS, it could be more aviation tax and support transport or railways on the transport side, more sufficiency in project regulation, and support national sufficiency policies and measures also within the budget support. The situation is NECPs are not adding up to the EU target. At least that was the first ones which were presented in 2023. So they're only adding up to 51 or the 55% target. So we believe the sufficiency policies can help EU meeting the emission gap. So with that, I'll thank you, and you can find more about these analyses on our website.
Thanks a lot, Gunnar. Thank you. Perfect. All right. We will move straight on to our first political commentary from the newly elected member of European Parliament, Thomas Pellerin-Kala. Félicitations, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. This is actually the very first time I speak as a newly elected MEP. So just introduce myself. I was elected on Sunday in France on the list, on the Social Democrat list led by Raphael Glucksmann. But this is not the first time I'm speaking actually at the European Sustainable Energy Week. I tried to count, I think it's like the 5th or something, because before becoming a politician 4 days ago, I was a researcher for more than 10 years, working on energy policy at the College of Europe, at the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and at the Institute for Climate Economics there. And sufficiency was also a topic on which I did work as a researcher, and it was also a topic on which I was invited to speak about as an expert, including when it came to citizen assemblies, where I didn't want to force my agenda on anyone. I was just letting citizens discuss, and very often, not at the very beginning, but after 1 or 2 days, a topic that relates to sufficiency would come up. There would be typically, 20 citizens with just one saying, sufficiency, and then I had to explain the concept. And I remember an old lady from Normandy, where I'm from, and after I expressed the concept of sufficiency to her, she looked at me and say, "Oh, you are really an egghead, because that's just common sense." And she has a point, but obviously common sense as a researcher is not a well-defined area of study, while sufficiency definitely is. I really like the idea, to use your word, Fiona, about sufficiency being the sweet spot in the donut. I actually like the word sufficiency more than its French translation, sobriété, because whether in English with sufficiency or in German with Suffizienz, there is the idea of having something that is just sufficient. So it's first about well-being. It's not about poverty. It's not about having something taken away from yourself. It's having something that is satisfying, if you want. So the first thing is about something that is satisfying, that is sufficient, and it's not going in the other extreme, the other direction, which is excess. In a way, if you allow me to do a little bit of philosophy for like 30 seconds, it's what the ancient Greeks told us about. Apart from 1 or 2 philosophers, they didn't want to live in poverty and in misery. But they also told us, through their myth, about the problem that come with hubris. And by the way, I'm not making a French political comment here. I'm staying on the topic. You may remember that ancient Greek story, that myth that we've learned as a kid of Icarus. He was stuck in a maze. His father created some wings, and he could fly. And his son Icarus thought that he was a god and not a man, and he flew too close to the sun, and therefore the sun led to his wings to melt, and he fell down. And that was a core element in the Greek mythology, and that's something that I think 21st century Europeans and humans should remember, because we are behaving like Icarus. We are thinking that we are more than what we are, which is just, one component of planet Earth, and we are flying too close to the sun. That's maybe a more poetic way of saying that we are overshooting 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, but that's essentially the gist of it. And I'm emphasizing this dimension because it leads to the political problem, which is now my political problem as an elected MP, which is that if you really want to do sufficiency, what is politically hard is that you ask powerful people to change. Historically speaking, putting the burden on poor people has been very easy. Very easy. That's what European societies have been doing for a few centuries. But when it comes to putting the burden of change on those who are in power, almost by definition, this becomes difficult. So just as a poll, can you raise your hand if you've taken a plane in the last 2 years? Okay, so that's pretty much everyone in this room. When I did ask that very same question to my family in Normandy, which is like a common working class, lower middle class family, I think there was only one person out of the 15 people that raised their hand. And so here you see the trouble, because obviously flying often, as we've seen and Matteo underlined that, is something that we need to reduce. But obviously those we need to reduce that are not the poor people, because they pretty much never fly. It's the people in power. It's elected MEPs, it's lobbyists in Brussels, it's civil servants from the Commission, but obviously all the other people that hold power in society. And that's a massive political challenge. That's a massive political difficulty that we need to tackle. And therefore, I'm not surprised to see more, a bigger place for sufficiency in citizen assemblies when you've got common people than when you have NECPs that by definition are written by people from the elite, because by definition they're written by high-level civil servants and politicians. Here again, I'm not criticizing them, I'm part of them now. so yeah. The other thing I wanted to underline is about the dimension of the collective choices. So sufficiency is not about individual choices first and foremost. It's about the social contract, the collective settings that we have set. For instance, if I had to answer the question, Thomas, can you live in a smaller space? The answer is, I mean, I can, but like my flat is 29 square meters, which is pretty small. It's big by Parisian standards, but very small by Brussels standards. Also, the element that goes with cycling, I'm not surprised to see that very few French people are cycling, just because the infrastructure is not there and the habit is not there. And the person I know who is French and cycle the most is someone who was a teenager in the Netherlands. and I think that's not only anecdotal. It shows that this person structured a habit of using of cycling very often, because he lived in a culture where the physical infrastructure, so the hardware if you want, but also, let me call that the mental infrastructure, so the software, what we have in our brain, the habits, the behavior, the herding behavior, the behavior of others, is something that just made it normal for him to cycle every day, and now he cycles every day in Paris. But he did that even when the hardware was not there, just because that was accustomed to him because of his time spent in the Netherlands. So then what should the EU do about it? I think it would be very interesting to, especially when the Commission thinks about the work program, to see how we can include sufficiency in several key policy areas. One of them, since I likely be joining the ITRE committee, will be about industry. How do you design an industrial policy that puts sufficiency at its core? And let me take the example of the automotive industry that was mentioned. Technically speaking, from a sufficiency perspective, we don't need smaller cars. That's not the accurate word. We need lighter cars. So this obviously, those two things are correlated. Ceteris paribus, as we say in Latin, the smaller the car, the lighter it is. But we can also think about other elements. In innovation, we can replace aluminium and steel with carbon fiber, for instance, which is a way to reduce the weight of the car. You can do also a redesign of the car. And just to add on this, there was a proposal by the CEO of Renault, who I must say is an Italian, so it's not a French thing, Luca Di Meo, who has a proposal to import in Europe the Japanese concept of the Kei-car, which are the very, very small car that the Japanese have in rural areas and in cities. So here we're talking about cars that weight maybe 500 kilograms. But in order to do that in Europe, you need to revise the safety standards that we have. But here you're thinking about cars that will be allowed inside cities when you drive 30 kilometers an hour, not cars that need to resist to a shock on a highway of 130 kilometers an hour. And so just to end on this, I think we need to get accustomed and familiarize ourselves with sufficiency, and also look at specific areas like industrial policy where sufficiency is nowhere near, and see, can we make a deal with also the automotive industry to see how we can have lighter, smaller cars inside urban areas in order to provide a new mode of transportation that here again already exists in Japan, and that we should maybe import, because that would be one contribution to tackling the climate and energy security challenge that we face.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Yeah, I think we can have a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, without further ado, we will move from the Parliament to the Commission. And we will hear our final speaker of the day, Dr. Frank Siebren-Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning from my side. I have to admit I don't have a track record of 10 years in energy policy, and I'm also not elected, I have to admit, and have no crystal ball as regards the future work program. But this is this study and this manifesto, let's say, come in at an interesting time to influence policy making in this area, which is an important one. I have been head of unit for 3 years in the unit dealing with just fair transitions and research, and we are in DG Employment and Social Affairs, so we are the unit who tries to take into account the employment skills, social distributional impacts of the climate transition in particular, and contribute policy making in this regard to make the transitions fair, because otherwise they will not happen. And this is the debate on sufficiency is partly about that. That's the point I'm trying to make. Let me maybe just start with 3 general remarks before I try to go briefly into what the Commission does and what could be hooks, what could be, let's say, frameworks in which to develop this further. My 3 initial remarks are first, I think as highlighted in the manifesto, what's very interesting is the focus on citizens and their fundamental needs and vulnerabilities, which has to be taken into account. This is not an agenda about making everyone consume less, but on the contrary, to empower people to live better and more healthily, and to and this by taking into account first the affordability of and access to essential goods and services, and second, to take into account the distributional aspects and fairness dimension of consumption and production patterns and emission patterns here, where there are carbon inequalities, which has been stated before. On the employment side, I have to highlight that we have a so-called European Pillar of Social Rights, which sets the agenda for social policy making at European level. It has 2 principles, 19 and 20, which highlight that we need to provide support to those in need for access to housing and housing assistance of good quality first, and second, in Principle 20, everyone has the right to access essential services of good quality, including water, sanitation, energy, transport, financial services, and digital communications, and support for access to such services should be available for all those in need. So here's a hook to work together, and sufficiency is part of that discussion. We also, this was already mentioned, have to take into account what is the current situation in people at risk of poverty or subject to material deprivation, energy poverty, transport poverty. We're working on all of those concepts. 95 million people in Europe are at risk of poverty, according to our statistics, out of which 20 million children. That's 1 in 4 of every child, 1 of 4 children in Europe. And we also have seen that energy poverty has increased, for example, despite a lot of measures to cushion the price effects during the energy price crisis, by 10.7 million to reach the numbers which were mentioned. And the same holds, for example, for housing cost overburden, and those are particularly high among people at risk of poverty. So that's something we obviously need to take into account in this discussion on sufficiency. My second point is one, this agenda also responds to the needs of people expressed. We have done a Eurobarometer survey on fairness perceptions of the green transition in 2022. It's a bit outdated. We probably have to look at, we want to do a new one next year to see to what extent this holds. But in that Eurobarometer, 9 out of 10 Europeans highlighted the need for a just transition. 3/4 admitted that they felt a personal responsibility to contribute to fighting climate change, including changing behaviors. More than half said they could change behaviors and save energy, although practical implementation is difficult, as we know. And we also had massive support for policy measures to invest infrastructure, increase infrastructure investments, public transport infrastructure, to support vulnerable households on this, and there was even a slight majority for introducing individual carbon quota. I'm not saying that this will be part of a work program, but it's part of a discussion on fairness we're having in this context. And the third point I would like to make is, I would like to refer to what I just saw on German TV these last days about Mr. Klaus Töpfer, who passed away. He was former executive director of UNEP and environmental minister of environment in Germany in the 80s and 90s. And the quotes which were brought from him 30 years ago were interesting in this context, because he then said economic interest, technological opportunities, and behavioral change 30 years ago will enable us to have a better future with 70 to 80% less of CO2 emissions, and we need these inputs from people. Maybe just one word on what the Commission does or is trying to do, what could be hooks here, because you have mentioned, all of you have mentioned what are the policy areas. The Commission does obviously a lot in promoting the circular economy, recycling, reuse, repair, and many others, energy savings. I would like to highlight first in the climate target plan, which was presented earlier this year, suggesting an intermediate climate target for 2040. 2040 of 90% emissions reduction. There's a 900-page impact assessment. If you feel like reading it, it's worth it. It's very detailed, much more granular, including on price effects. But I'm mentioning it here because it did include an additional scenario, a so-called life scenario on behavioral changes and how this could contribute to reducing emissions. So worth looking at this. This was part of the discussions. Second, the NECPs were already mentioned. We do work on guidance there, and the Commission has issued recommendations to all member states to better assess what we call just transition aspects in the NECPs and take it up. And next year, the Energy Union Governance Regulation will have to be reviewed, and there could be discussions also how to strengthen the legal basis for this. Third, we have issued accounts negotiated with member states under French presidency, accounts recommendation on fair transition. We are monitoring this with the member states. It's quite broad on how social employment skills policies overall can support fair transitions. And there's a need to do better as recognized by everyone. We consult social partners, civil society on this monitoring. And it also promotes what's called a whole of society approach. So in line with the manifesto calling for new participatory models, I think it's something we need to engage in, and we are trying to engage in, involving everyone in discussion on actual impacts and also best practices and good stories. And here again, your study comes in. And my last two comments probably would be on the funding side. There's a new social climate fund which is being set up. Here two guidances are being developed, and a lot of your ideas are interesting in this context, how probably sufficiency elements could be part of measures to be financed. I cannot announce this, but this is certainly something to be taken into account. And the last point I would like to mention, we're also working on what we want to call a European Fair Transition Observatory. We want to set up a one-stop shop common knowledge hub at European level, integrating information on fair transition policies, on best practices, but also on the actual impacts. And the work you're doing fits very nicely here, and probably the outputs of Fulfill and Enforce will certainly be part of this. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Round of applause. Okay, before we move into the discussion part with all of you, we have two final Slido questions prepared for you. So please join once more on slido.com with the event code hashtag EUSEW2024. And we will start with the first question. We've heard a lot about how infrastructures and policies shape our lifestyles, but also the mental infrastructure that Thomas mentioned. So we would like to hear from you. What holds you back from having vegetarian or vegan dishes more often? What would you need to change? Okay, I'm starting to read as things pop up. We have a big nothing, which I like. More choice, availability, accessibility, expensive, better tofu in Belgium. I like that. I think that goes in the category of a better offer. Taste and more time to cook. Culture, time consuming. We also have some people who are already vegetarian for many years, who the nothing gets bigger. Please, go ahead.
I'm often, I was, but hopefully still will be often invited at Commission dinners and European Parliament dinners. And just to make a point, I've been always asking for the vegetarian option. And just especially for the people that answer taste. Obviously, I mean, everyone's taste is different, but I just want an anecdotal story. I was with one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament. We were like 30 people dining at Parliament, and there was some, let's say, not very tasty meat that all the others had. And because I did ask for the vegetarian option, I had risotto al tartufo, so risotto with truffles. I guess that's a translation, which in terms of taste is something that I strongly recommend. So if you've got problem with taste, just ask for the risotto, especially in EU institutions. It tends to be quite good, much better often than the meat option.
Thanks a lot. All right, so I think we just heard there is maybe some stuff that you can do about the taste problem. Other than that, we have culture, more options, make vegetarian cheaper, habits, social acceptance, less family lunch. I think that's the social aspect right there. Yeah, but we see a lot of, I'd say we see a lot of structural factors beside the taste and the social factors we have. We can see here once more that there is also a problem with the offer. So maybe that is something we could better address. And to show you, we also asked this question in some of our citizen science workshops that I would like to show you if I can. Oh, that was too much. Yes, there we go. So here you can see some of the results because obviously we had more time and we did this in a bit of a more elaborative way. But basically we also allowed everybody to reflect upon their food choices and see what infrastructures and policies they would need to be able to change. So to just give you some examples, we have food vouchers for healthy and local products, climate-friendly options in public cafeterias, lower tax on organic or vegetarian products, marketing and informational campaigns, and food labels that could help people to consume less meat, fish and dairy, waste less, compost more, growing their own vegetables, or consume more locally. For more information, please visit our website. Okay, moving on to the second Slido question, which is on transport. What holds you back from using your car less often? To cycle and use public transport, work from home more often? These are just examples. So what would you need to change to use your car less often? Nothing, I don't have a car, that's good. I'm from the US, okay. I guess that's a cultural difficulty. Quality of public transport, safer bike lanes, I would underline that. Cycling lines in rural areas, also a big problem. I was speaking about how great it's in Paris, but I know for a fact that in France and other areas it's really not great, and there's a huge lack of investment in the infrastructure. Poor public transport, what holds you back? A move to the Netherlands, that's great. Live rurally, poor infrastructure, prices of train, weather in Belgium, well, we can't change that for you. It's changing, it's true. We can if we do nothing. I don't recommend. Okay, great. I think we get the idea. There are some things that are maybe things that are just habits, or I see distance. Oh, I see also thefts. Of course, that I understand as well. Navigo price, but lots of things that are infrastructural that we might be able to influence with better bike infrastructure, also in rural areas, cheaper e-bikes, better public transport, and better prices of trains. I see Thomas has a reaction. Go ahead.
Yeah, to underline, so this was a piece of research that was also financed by Horizon Europe a while back. It's the link between sufficiency, climate change, and gender equality. And there is a big issue of the safety of women in public space, both when it comes to working and public transportation. So I'm not sure what the EU can do, to be fair, on that topic. It's more a local thing. But the more we fight against, I don't know what's the right word in English, but let's say sexist violence in public space, whether it's in city centers working or in public transport, obviously the better it is from a security perspective, from a gender equity perspective, but also from a climate perspective to enable more people in Europe to be able to access public transport and use cars less often.
Thanks a lot. And we have another reaction from Sergio.
Well, I think that such surveys should be detailed by country, and because probably if you ask this question to people in the Netherlands, in Germany, they have public transport, so they can choose. There are several cities, especially in Southern Europe or in Italy, where public transportation simply does not exist and cannot match with working engagement. So it doesn't make sense to apply a common policy in places where the options for use of public transportation are greatly different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sergio. Thanks for these two important points. I think they both point to that there's still work to be done on the to make this more accessible for everyone. I would like to move to the Q&A. We have a short 10 minutes left. I don't manage to access my... Yes, there we go. Time for discussion. I see some of you have already posted some interesting questions for our speakers. I would like to start with one question that is a bit of a summary of 4 different people's questions, so it seems to really resonate with people. And we've already touched upon it also in several of our presentations, which is the fairness aspect of these measures. And we have the question, how can sufficiency work for vulnerable groups who are already making a lot of efforts just to live a decent life? How can we make sure that the burden and the benefits are more fairly distributed? So those with less sufficient lifestyles and more means should do more. And we also have the same question which touches upon what Sergio just said for the different regions in Europe where we have maybe the burdens are not fairly distributed amongst people. How can sufficiency tackle that? Do we have someone who would like to reply to that? Gunnar, please go ahead.
Yeah,
it's on.
Yeah, if I may start on that, of course, it has to be analyzed for each sufficiency measures and also the suite of measures, because it's a combination of measures that are actually making it. But if you're thinking about some of the things like when we are talking about transporting less, it means that we want the functions closer to each other, which also makes that if you have less money, you can easier go to the different functions. You don't have to spend so much money, for instance, on a car. And the same goes if you want to have make it easier to have smaller houses. It also means that it will be more affordable houses. So there's a number of things that are actually pointing in the right direction.
Thank you, Gunnar. Anybody else who wants to react? Elisabeth and then Thomas?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Gunnar just said. I think that many of the sufficiency policies that we discussed in the project usually are more target more strongly the more affluent people or the more elite, like this idea of flying less. I think Thomas just really explained it. It's more us here in the room who'd be targeted by that and who'd need then maybe have structures that support them not to travel at all. So like, no, Eve traveled as well, but elsewhere, but a shorter way, or also to think about like how providing the structures to support this. So actually, and better public transport facilities would actually support poorer people with lower means, freeing them also, for example, to spend a lot of money of owning their own car, which is also a financial burden besides giving freedom.
Thank you, Elisabeth. I think we have Thomas, Frank, and Yves who want to react, and then we'll try to get to a second question.
Yeah. And so I think it's very important also politically to start from the material condition on which people live, and those are extremely different depending on the social position in a society. What should sufficiency do to reduce the consumption of people who are so poor that they have no cars, they live in 11 square meters and heat their homes in the winter at 17 Celsius degree? Like nothing. Like those are not the problem. Those people, I mean, the CO2 emissions over the year are likely like 2-3 tons of CO2 maximum. On the other end, what should sufficiency target are obviously the people that are having the most excess lifestyle and the more excessive lifestyle. Just using the French word here, so in French sufficiency is sobriety, so and so therefore the metaphor works better in French than English. But like those who need to get sober are those who are drunk, and so those who are drunk are the people that have the wealth that is required to have that kind of lifestyle. Like if you want to travel to Marrakesh every weekend, or to go to New York, or just to go to Las Vegas for a city break of 3 days, you are in the top 10%, if not 5% of European societies. And so therefore sufficiency policies are also policies that are about fairness. When we talk about fairness in Europe, we often talk about the poorest, but fairness by definition is also talking about the wealthiest, to make sure that the wealthier stay on the ground. You know, those who dream to leave us, earthlings, and go live in Mars. Those are the people that we should aim at when it comes to sufficiency, because the more unequal our societies are, the more there are some people in the elite that think they are detached from the collective life, and that's one of the criteria that leads to collapse of societies, according to the work of scientist Jared Diamond that studied this a while back already.
Thank you, Thomas. And moving right on. Yes, you can clap if you want.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I tried to make the point that this is not a discussion about everyone having to consume less, and also there are individual choices to be made how to contribute according to their own means to the transition. And I fully agree. During the energy crisis, we had sometimes the impression that everyone had to save energies. No, we were confronted with the question: should people heat or eat? This is not an acceptable question in Europe, and not something, as I tried to argue with the European Pillar of Social Rights, we can accept. Some people, some of vulnerable groups have to get the support to get both. The difficult part of the fairness in the transition aspect is and that's what the Social Climate Fund tries to do, is to combine the support throughout the transition through income, direct income support, other support means, with the necessary investments to bring everyone to a better place. Energy communities, renewable energy communities were mentioned, others where hopefully the price is lower and where probably people can consume easily more than today without being penalized through higher prices. The impression of unfairness comes up because, as all speakers, I think, mentioned, carbon inequalities have gone up both within and between our countries. They're probably even bigger today within our economies than between. So we have to address this at international as well as at national levels to support the most vulnerable. And we also, I would like to highlight, in the Fit for 55 package or others, deliberately the Commission has proposed a mix of measures which is not only about price signals, because this would allow people to pay their continued consumption. This is not considered as fair and would probably not be sustainable. You also have to add changing of standards and rules. And I would finish with one figure I haven't mentioned, but which the Belgian presidency often used in their events on just transition, to say this is what just transition is about. It was on the Eurobarometer one question where we asked the Europeans, how confident are you that by 2050 we will have achieved our target of having sustainable, affordable goods and services in place? And half of the citizens in 22 already was not confident. Now, if you have this lack of certainty, lack of planning investment certainty, lack of incentives, and an impression of lack of fairness in parts of the population, this will not set the right incentives for people to change and to do where they can contribute, whatever it is. It's not about everyone having to consume less.
Thank you very much. I am really sorry, Yves, but I got the sign that we have to clean the room. So I think this was a really good final couple of words on really stressing what sufficiency is about. It is about fairness. It is not about everybody consuming less, but it is about cutting luxury consumption where we can and making the transition fair for everybody. All that's left for me to say now is to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you to all the speakers for your time and your valuable insights. I would like to also thank all of you for contributing with your questions and contributing to the Slido, and to invite you to stay in touch. I am trying to access once more the... Yes. No, not yet. Yes, to stay in touch with the Fulfill event, for example, by joining our final event in September on the 18th, in Brussels once again, Brussels and online. We will present all of our findings and have a network apéro in case that could tempt some of you to attend. Please stay in touch also via social media and our website that I mentioned, where we have published all of the deliverables and all of the findings that you only got a glimpse of today. And if there is anything you would like to reach out, you can also always reach us via email. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the coffee break, and have a good rest of the event.